Thanks for joining us on another edition of Life Sciences and Biotech CEOs. Today, I'm excited to have with us Dr. Nikhil Shah, CEO of Nephrodite, as our guest. Nephrodite is an early-stage medical device company focused on developing an implantable, continuously functioning kidney dialysis device. Dr. Shah earned his undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan and attended medical school at Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine. He trained in general surgery at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, followed by subspecialty training in robotics, laparoscopy, and urological oncology, also at Henry Ford. Dr. Shah has performed thousands of minimally invasive and robotic procedures with specific expertise in genitourinary oncology and urinary tract reconstruction. Dr. Shah is a recipient of numerous awards and has authored many peer-reviewed publications. He's an adjunct associate professor at Georgia Tech and serves as an active advisor to many companies in the medical technology industry. Welcome, Dr. Shah.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Sure. Like many life sciences founders, I think the seed for your vision started with a patient. Can you tell us about Holly and after whom your implantable device is named aptly?
Absolutely. I'll start by myself and my co-founder, Dr. Hip Nguyen, were visiting professors at the German Aerospace Lab, where we were asked to speak on the future of medicine and surgery based on our previous inputs, I guess, and our interest in innovation in the medical field. And as we were there visiting, we saw a really amazing innovation that the German scientists worked on, which was a heart failure device called a ventricular assist device. And that wasn't new. The first device had really been developed by Dr. DeBakey here in the United States. But this had some really, I guess, neat innovations, if you will, along with heart failure device. And both myself and my co-founder, being surgeons in the kidney space, asked the question, wow, what if we had a device that could be a kidney failure device, basically helping patients with end-stage kidney disease? And specifically, this was passionate around my co-founder because as a pediatric urologist, a pediatric surgeon, he was very attuned to taking care of patients, young patients with kidney failure. And one of them really stood out in his mind, which was a patient named Holly. And Holly had suffered from years of end-stage kidney disease in and out of hospital. When her colleagues, her peers, her classmates were out on the, out on recess playing outside, she was often in a dialysis clinic, or she was suffering the issues of kidney disease and didn't have the energy. She was always sick, always in pain, always tired. And my co-founder, Dr. Nguyen, always relates, she always just wanted to be normal. And so without exception, when we began to conceive our device, he made it very clear that this device is going to be named in her honor, Holly. And that's how that came about.
Okay. And so it started kind of, I guess, in a sense, with both of your regular performance, as physicians, and with Holly, and I assume plenty of others with whom you were familiar or Dr. Nguyen was familiar. She just happened to be the most significant, let's say. But you came kind of to personally understand the need for a new solution for late-stage renal patients. And then my understanding is that you and Dr. Nguyen really had no previous association. You didn't know one another going in. So you had this kind of eureka moment together, right? Can you share with us kind of how that went?
Yeah, absolutely. We had sat looking at this heart device, and he often gives me credit, but it's universally the credit goes to him. But we both sort of latched onto this, this idea. And let me just take you back a little bit here, Tim. Dialysis was really sort of pioneered, if you will, in the 1940s, but really came about with a physician named Dr. Scribner at the University of Washington, Seattle, where in the 1950s and 60s, we really started dialysis became a reality. And in the process of doing that, it was the first time that patients had an option that would save their life. It was a life-saving option. What's interesting is that the dialysis that we do today, structurally, and the way it works, is the exact same form of dialysis that we do today that we did back then. And that's fascinating to me, because if you look at many aspects of healthcare, or just many aspects of what we do, our television sets, our phones, our computers, there's no way we're still using technology from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But even so, electronic medical record, the different types of sophisticated devices we use in the operating room, they are not the same. And so we have seen a paucity of innovation in the kidney disease space, specifically with dialysis. And so it really wasn't lost upon us, the problems that patients suffer on dialysis. And while it was great for its time that it was a life-saving treatment, it really has not gone through the iterations over the years of getting better. And so for us, knowing all of the trials and tribulations and the peaks and the troughs that patients with end-stage kidney disease go through, we sat and at a table sort of said, what would that device look like? And I'll just take a few seconds longer to say, what we decided at that time was there's two types of dialysis, one where patients dialyze through their abdomens called peritoneal dialysis, and one called hemodialysis, where they do it usually through a graft in their arm, but we use the blood system. And what we said was, let's take the best components of hemodialysis that work, filtering the blood directly, and let's take the parts of peritoneal dialysis that work. Patients can be at home, they have more time to themselves, it's more a portable kind of device, but it gets them out of a center. And let's merge these together to conceive a design that truly works for patients. And so that's kind of how we just started to think about it.
Okay, so end-stage renal disease afflicts about, give or take, I guess, 800,000 patients in the US and about 2 million worldwide. And traditional dialysis, as we know it today, costs the US Medicare system about $34 billion a year, which soaks up about 7% of the total Medicare budget for only less than 1% of the total Medicare population. So that kind of gives an idea of some of the economic limitations of traditional dialysis. Tell us a little bit about some of the the limitations of traditional dialysis in terms of how a patient experiences it.
Absolutely. Just to take those statistics one step forward too, 1%, a little over 1%, about 1.2% of the federal budget is spent on end-stage kidney disease. Wow. Just to put that in perspective, 2% of the federal budget is spent on education. And this is to treat one disease.
Wow.
So it is massive. When we talk to patients and we hear what their concerns are, or their issues, if you will, maybe not so much concerns, they really fall along what we found to be three major areas. The first area really sits into what we call the intermittency of dialysis. And what I mean by that is our kidneys, as everyone knows, probably, right? They work continuously 24/7, right? And they're constantly filtering our blood. And dialysis, on the other hand, is only working, right, when patients get to a center. And a majority of patients currently do in-center dialysis, where they go to a center and they're hooked up to a machine, and a big needle is put into a graft in their arm, and they're tethered to a chair, and they have to sit in that chair and for at least 3 hours, if not more. And they get their blood cleansed, if you will, or filtered. Now, I just want to, hit this point home. That's 3 to 4 hours in the chair. For a lot of folks that go on dialysis, they have to get to the center. And many people don't necessarily have the means to get there. They have to wait for a bus, they have to get a ride, and that takes time. And then after dialysis, they have to get some sort of transportation back. So you're literally losing a big part of your day just to go to dialysis 3 to 4 times per week. So the intermittency in terms of the logistics is a problem. The second part of the intermittency is that when they're going through dialysis, a lot of patients tell us, look, I don't feel well before dialysis because all the toxins have built up. Then I go through dialysis. They tell us it's like running a marathon back to back in terms of the drain of sitting and having your blood removed and then put back in, and your blood removed and put back in. And then after dialysis, they're so drained from having undergone dialysis. So there's a large part of them that just never really feels good. And then the pain of the graft, the functioning of the graft, and then there's a lot of mental health issues, Tim. There's a lot of depression that's underdiagnosed, or just physicians are often unaware of or just don't address. So there's a big mental health problem in dialysis, and it's because of those rise of toxins in between dialysis sessions. Again, it's the intermittency of the treatment. It's a big problem. The second thing that they talk about to us quite a bit is the actual access. We have to create a surgical graft in their arm, and those grafts often fail. They get infected, they get clotted off, and they can't be used. And so when those grafts fail, they have to go to another place in the arm. They go from the lower arm to the upper arm. When that fails, they go to the other arm. And those grafts will fail often within months of being surgically treated. And so once they lose their graft access, they then really have no other access than maybe a line in their neck going directly into their heart, which is a huge problem in terms of clots and things like that, and infections. And so the access is a big problem for them. It scares them. And once they've had a graft fail and they have to go back to surgery and get a neck catheter in, it's always a big point of fear and anxiety for those patients. So number two was their access, which was a problem. But the third issue, and this was the one that was the greatest issue for them, is that many of our patients said they would trade 10 or 20 years of living on dialysis as they do today if they just had 1 year where they could live like they were normal, where they were free, where they could go and do as they please, that they weren't stuck to. Imagine how difficult it is to travel or to have a job, right? Because you don't have the luxury. You have to find a dialysis center. And so you don't have the freedoms that we take for granted when you have that and you're always feeling ill. And so we thought, bringing it back to Nephrodite, why should we not in this day and age have a continuous filtering mechanism like our kidneys, like a heart failure device, that can keep patients not only filtering continuously and not feeling terrible, but also removes the access problem and allows patients to be free, to feel independent. That was our vision.
So if and when the graft becomes infected, does that somehow put a further limitation on the ability to do the traditional dialysis? If it's infected, are you therefore not able to complete the dialysis? Or
that's correct. So if the graft in the arm, I assume we're talking about the arm graft. Right. If the arm graft gets infected, you can't use the graft. What you have to do is essentially stop using that graft. You have to treat them with antibiotics. Usually you have to do the treatment through a vein, but the only thing we can do at that point is put a temporary neck catheter. That line goes really close to the heart, if not in the heart, and you put that neck catheter in, and they're dialyzing through that neck catheter, and that becomes their only access until a new graft can be made, or until that graft is successfully treated with antibiotics and be used again.
Wow. So let's talk then about exactly how the Nephrodite device works and exactly how it's an improvement over the current standard of care.
Sure. So our device, so let's walk back just a bit. What is dialysis? What does dialysis do? Our kidneys have two main functions. One is to filter the toxins, if you will, and the waste from the blood. And then the second function is to remove that waste or toxins through also removing water. If we didn't remove water from our systems, and hence that's why we urinate or micturate, right? We go to the bathroom. If we didn't do that, we would sort of drown internally. So we have to have a way to, number one, we have to filter or cleanse the toxins from our blood, and number two, we have to remove the water. And so any device that's out there has to be able to perform those two functions. So our device is sort of split into two. One, we have about the size of a small child's fist, so smaller than my fist.
Yeah.
Our device, which would be surgically implanted sort of in the pelvis area, like where the groin is, where sort of hernia, where we get hernias and stuff in the groin, it would be in that area where we would surgically implant our device. So it would require an operation. We think that it would be what we call a same day operation. You'd go into the hospital, you might stay overnight, but you would be discharged the next morning or maybe the same day. And it would be surgically connected to a blood vessel so that blood could flow through the device and allow it to be filtered, the blood to be filtered. Then from our device, we would have a set of a tubing that would come out of the device. So it would actually come out of the lower abdomen. And that would connect to patients with a wearable, either a backpack that they had or a vest. So we're not limiting it to one or the other, a backpack or a vest. And on that backpack or a vest would be what we call dialysate. So every patient that undergoes dialysis actually has plasma, like not plasma, but they have water essentially with electrolytes and minerals and things, which we call dialysate. And that interacts with the blood, and that allows through our membranes to extract the toxins and also extract water. And so there'd be a communication with the wearable to the device inside of the dialysate outside to allow for that exchange to happen. So it's a two-part process. It's the implantable that stays implanted for about a year, and it's the wearable component that allows for that removal of the water. I hope that made sense.
Okay. And so how did the engineering for that device come about? Neither one of them being engineers.
Right? Yeah, well, so that's the beauty of I think the marriage of what we were able to do was find really talented scientists and engineers. And with my co-founder, he goes by Bob, is his nickname. With Bob and I sort of being, I guess, innovators in our own sorts. A lot of what Bob and I have done in our careers is be translational. Hence my work at Georgia Tech over the years and other things, where bringing something from the bench to bedside is you've got to really bring the clinicians and the doctors, and you've got to bring the engineers, each of whom have their own sets of ideas, but you've got to bring them together, because the engineers might have the finest piece of engineering together, but if it has no applicability to the surgeons or the doctors, it doesn't go anywhere. And the doctors may have a great idea, but if it's not engineeringly feasible, it's never going to hit there. So we've got to find that beautiful blend. And I think what Bob and I have been really successful in doing is really maturing that communication between scientist clinician and scientist engineer, and bringing that together.
And those engineers are colleagues there at Nephrodite, or are they?
That's correct. So we have our internal engineering team, and then likewise we also work with advisors and consultants to the company that bring us their ideas as well.
Okay. So one of the things that we're always interested in here in this podcast is the dedication and the persistence that it takes to realize true innovation. And as part of that persistence, one must also overcome a certain amount anyway of frustration. Can you share with us a time or two when both you and Bob might have said to yourselves, gosh, I'm over this temporarily, right? And how you got yourselves back on track?
Tim, it's a seesaw of sorts. So I'd have to tell you the first part of it is I think some of it's personality. If you're the person where the glass is always half empty, I think you're gonna struggle as an innovator and an entrepreneur. The glass has always got to be half full, and you've got to also have the belief that you're going to fill the other half, no matter what. I think the other part of our core is Bob and I were trained as surgeons in our background, and when you go through surgical training, it's interesting to me when we look at some of the younger folks today that do a lot of video gaming and things like that. If you don't like the way the game's going, you can always hit reset. When you're in the middle of an operation and things aren't going your way, there's no reset. You're in it, you're in the thick of it, and that patient's outcome, that patient's life is depending on you. And you learn that I think emotional state and stress very early when you become a surgeon, and that's true of probably many other careers and special operations and pilots and things like that, right? But you have to learn not only to manage your stress, but you also have to know that you're going to get through it, and it's going to be great. We have a saying in surgery that, right, I may not always be right, but I'm always going to make a decision, and I'm always going to make that. So I think part of that was our core and our personalities and the training that we went through. But share an example. I'll tell you one skill set that we never learn, right, is asking for money. And when we go out there and as clinicians, as surgeons, and to some degree innovators, and we're asking people for money, it makes sense, but they ask some very, very tough questions. And we just haven't been trained that way. And I can tell you how many times we've been asked questions, and you sit there and you say, look, this is a groundbreaking innovation. It's going to change the face of dialysis. Look at the cost of the system. But there is a whole strategy around actually doing that. And when you couple that with sometimes the data doesn't always work out the way you want it to, and you're going to have to do more testing, but the problem is more testing costs more money. Right. and you need the more money, but they say go do more testing, and that can be really frustrating, and oftentimes you find yourself at a place where you just wish it would be easier. But I found a couple things, and this may be what you're leading to, but I never paused to ask for help, to find the right people to help. Structuring the narrative of not only what we were doing for patients and clinically, but how that makes sense to people that we're asking money of was really important. And finding the right talent, not just the engineering talent, but finding the talent that could help me achieve those goals was really important. So that was the biggest thing. It was the frustration. The way I got beyond the frustration was, what's the best way to solve the problem? And it didn't have to always come from me. It had to come from me in terms of aligning my goals with others.
So I'm interested in some of the attributes in terms of your ability to, I'm going to use kind of a colloquialism here and say, kind of dumb it down. How do you go from the talent that enabled you and Bob to create this innovation to, gosh, guys, I'm going to explain to you from the grassroots, really in simple terms, how this works and why it's important and why it's better than whatever else is out there. That's a talent. It's one that I've struggled with personally, um, and I think many do. But you somehow have the ability to connect in that way. How did you do it?
Well, I'll tell you, I approach this with utter and total humility in the sense that it's not innate, um, and while I feel I may have accomplished it in some regards, I am constantly learning. And from where I started, if one of my board members was here, Michael, he will tell you a lot of stories how I sat in front of investors and I did not know what I was talking. I did not know what I was talking about. But I learned, and I took each one of those, no matter how embarrassing to me, or how negative maybe the effect at the time or afterwards might have been. And I don't mean in a punitive way or anything like that, but just in a way that wasn't successful for the company. I learned and I moved forward, and I think that gets to the last question of the persistence and the drive and the utter grit that it really does take. Um, if you're not prepared to do that, and I would say it's the most evident in a medical device, class 3 medical device, where you have maybe the hardest regulatory path to achieve. Um, it may be not for you. But in terms of this, we were so absolutely dedicated and passionate about realizing the success of our device. But how did I do it? I did it by asking questions. I did it by learning, and I processing that. But I'll tell you, I had really good help, and a big part of our team was bringing on people that that had venture capital experience, deep bench experience in the venture capital space, commercializing space, sales and marketing, and then on my engineering side, and then bringing that all together in a way that told a nice story was helpful for me and helped me to learn. I think the other part of it was just my general approach to patients. I really was sensitive, and perhaps because of my own personal experiences in healthcare myself as a patient, um, to not talk over my patients, but also to not be patronizing towards them. Um, I just like I don't know their space, they don't know the medical space, and it really was important for me that they truly understood what they were going through if I was going to do an operation on them, and I really carried that over to Nephrodite.
Interesting, and probably it has a lot to do with dedication to the vision. You know, I'm reading a biography by Doris Kearns Goodwin of Abraham Lincoln, and she talks about how after losing 2 Senate races, one of which he certainly should have won, he sort of gave it to the other guy. He sort of experienced a period of withdrawal, and he studied carefully how each founder felt about slavery, so that he was able to recraft kind of his narrative around that particular issue, which sort of he was so interested in terms of its effect ultimately on the Union, that it drove him to success. And continuous study and sort of recrafting his message. So it's, I guess, similar to that.
I think so. I would phrase that in exactly the same way, to say that it is extremely important to understand every stakeholder that I'm addressing, what their incentive or motivation is to want to hear me or talk to me. If it's a general group, that's fine. But even within a general group, for example, Nephrodite was one of the finalists in the South by Southwest pitch competitions this past spring. And we pitched to a large audience in the room, but the greater audience were the panel of judges that were sitting off to the side, and understanding that the judges were a combination of innovators, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs themselves. They understood a lot of what we were going through, but understanding everyone's incentive. If I am talking to a group of clinicians, I know that they're going to be more interested on the technical side. If I'm speaking to a bunch of potential investors, if they're friends and family versus angels and family offices versus sophisticated venture capital folks, everyone has an interest of what's my what's my upside, and understanding what their incentive or upside is really, really important at a granular level, because that is what's going to portend success in that scenario.
That's good advice to all those out there who are endeavoring to do the same thing. So you mentioned that Holly is an FDA Class 3 medical device, and that there are particularly high hurdles in terms of approvals and that sort of thing. Can you tell us more about exactly what those hoops might be, and how you approach working with the FDA and culling the product and all that sort of thing in order to overcome those hurdles?
Absolutely. So we have a gentleman that's on our team named Tim Duggins, who's really a great regulatory
I like that name.
person for us. And Tim had a saying when we first got together and he joined the company. He said, with a Class 3 device and the regulatory process, especially with the FDA, we really need to approach them early and often. We need to communicate with them. They need to know about us. And our approach has really been that is frequent communications with the regulatory bodies, understanding the pathway, which is why we have an internal regulatory person whose sole purpose is to be directing the company in that way. And I would say that the other thing that helped us quite a bit is on July 10th, 2019, the federal government instituted the first of its kind, an executive mandate forwarding and embracing the whole concept of kidney health and kidney care in the United States. There's a lot that yet still have to come of that, but the fact that they did that for a single disease state, kidney disease, is really telling. And a lot of that is predicated upon the fact that when President Nixon inaugurated the fact that Medicare in the 1970s would pay for end-stage kidney disease and dialysis care, again, one disease state, which is why Medicare is the single greatest payer and provider of dialysis services in the United States. It really makes it more important that we recognize what the regulatory needs are. I will say also that again, finding the right help internally and forging the path, understanding that path, and making sure that as we develop our device, we are doing it in a way that will meet regulatory. The regulatory burden is important, and what I mean by that is, some lessons learned from others, right? Some folks, they create their devices and they do things, but have given little sort of attention to the regulatory process. And then you find yourself having to go back and chase your tail because you didn't do it early on. And that comes at a great cost and a great time burden. And so we've been very, very mindful of that, to say, let's align the pathway of what the regulatory demands could be and might be. And I would finally end it by saying this. There always, or usually, you can find a predicate device or a device that's out there. It may not be exactly the same, but it's close, and it got approval. In our case, the heart failure devices, the VAD devices, they're not in the kidney space, but very relatable. In fact, it was how our vision, it was the genesis of our vision. And so we actually aligned ourselves with what was the burden of the ventricular assist device or the heart failure devices in order to get FDA approval. And how can we sort of mirror that as an approach, because that actually would be very helpful for the FDA to know that that's what we did as well.
Have there been changes to Holly that result specifically from suggestions by the FDA? This will get you to approval faster. This is the way to go. Change this or that.
On the technical side, no. But I would say maybe we're a little too early. We haven't gotten to that design lock phase or a first in human phase yet. But understanding the pathway and what we would need to do in order to test the device on the safety side has been really important. What if the device failed? What if there's a leak in the housing and things like that? That has influenced the design of our device, and that will continue to influence the design of our device. It also influences in other ways, and what I mean by that is, we at one point had internal batteries in the mechanism of our device that would be implanted, and we knew that the FDA is really, really concerned about having internal batteries because of all the potential complications they can have with that. So we moved any source of heat or any potential sort of battery from inside our device to outside on the wearable. That way we wouldn't have not only the risks to the patients, but which is the most important thing,
right,
but it was why the FDA was concerned about it. So it has influenced us in terms of how we've designed it, but not necessarily as direct input from the regulatory bodies.
So can you share with us, where are you in terms of the journey to in human trials?
Absolutely. We have our full working prototype device. It's I would say it's not winning awards for the best looking device right now. But it works, and it looks great to me, right? It's my baby. And so we have tested it exhaustively on the bench. So we've tried to mimic what it would be like in a kidney failure state. We have tested it for robustness and to do all the work that we think the kidney device would need to do. We've taken it a few steps further, where we've tested it in an animal model, and we've asked, is it technically feasible to put it in an animal? What was that like surgically? And then we've tested the device for its function. But we've only been able to do that in what we call acute animal studies. So we've only tested in the animal for a short period of time, about half a day. And so the next steps for us would be to really refine the device to really look better and what we would call the human grade device that we would put into a human. So we'll be in sort of further design refining mode and get that device ready for us to get to first in human trials. And my guess is, well, I hate to guess, we're really, I hate to put any sort of dark cloud over, we're really superstitious folks, but that will be coming in due time, and we're really excited about that, and we're moving forward at great efforts for that.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the difficulties that the system has in terms of financing traditional dialysis. I think you said it was roughly 1.5% of the budget, right? How do you see the economics of the device once approved?
So I think if you take the fact that patients have to have a graft, a surgical graft made in their arm, that they have to go to a dialysis center, which is costly. They have to have, every time they go for in-center dialysis, they have to have blood taken to test their blood to see what the toxin burden is in their bloodstream. And then all of the attendant complications that happen to patients along the way in dialysis, whether it's an infection or their graft not working, any of just normal complications. Most patients with dialysis have the number one complication of patients on dialysis and end-stage kidney disease is a cardiovascular complication, whether it's a heart attack, a stroke, or some form of that. That becomes a burden to the healthcare system, and unfortunately a cost, not to mention all the issues to the patients themselves. And so if you take that all together, it's not just having the dialysis, it's not just having the surgery, it's all of the burden of the costs that come with patients having complications and other issues. If you look at that, the Holly device really is what we would call a true kidney replacement mechanism. It's not an artificial kidney. There's other things that the kidneys do on the endocrine side and things like that, but it is a true kidney replacement like we haven't seen before. And so if we have a device like ours that's continuously filtering the toxins like a kidney would, and it's removing the water, not to mention a patient's quality of life improving, but their health outcomes improving as well, and their contribution to their families, to society, to be able to have the job, to attend birthday parties and travel and things like that. I think there's a tremendous benefit. Our belief is that conservatively, we would be able to spare the health system about 30% per patient in terms of a cost per patient. And that's really what we believe to be a conservative approach. Obviously, we won't know that till our device is out there and working, but we think based on the way our device functions and would function, it would be about a 30% at a minimum savings to the U.S. healthcare system. And that's just bare bones. And also, if you look at our device, again, the continuous functioning, not having the graft in, remember this is sewn directly to the vascular supply, and it's going to be inside the body. So there's a huge reduction in the risk of it not working for infection and clotting off. But we think that that on balance with being able to get this to patients, I'll just give you a few more statistics. There were 25,000 kidney transplants done last year in the United States. 25,000. There are over 100,000 people waiting on the transplant list. If you look at the average transplant center in the United States, so we have about 250 transplant centers in the United States, but I would say about a third of those are really doing a majority of the volume. And the problem is that when a patient gets referred to a medical center for as a potential transplant patient with end-stage kidney disease, only about 20% of those patients are ever getting a kidney or getting on the list to get a kidney. Now that's a general number that probably could vary a little bit by institution, but a vast majority of patients with end-stage kidney disease are not getting on the transplant list and will never get a kidney. And then the problem is that every day they're on dialysis, their morbidity and their mortality increases. I'll give you one last statistic. From the day patients go on dialysis, their 5-year mortality, the probability they're going to die in 5 years is still over 50% from the day they start dialysis. And so from our approach, if we can get patients with a continuous functioning, if they can't get a kidney, which is the majority of patients, and we can get them with a device that at least keeps them healthy so they can get on the transplant list and stay on the transplant list, but also improve their quality of life, that's a home run. That's a home run.
And it's so interesting, not only from a patient perspective, and one of the things that I love about life sciences is the dedication of the people. I love the people. It's the greatest people I've ever met. But then the other part of it is what it does to the economy in a macro sense. If 20% of GDP is healthcare spending and 85% of that is for chronic care, this being maybe the most egregious instance of that, what happens if we can cut that, as you say, by 30 or 35%? Maybe that 29 trillion isn't so important anymore. We can do other things that can help people's lives in other ways. So it's just so exciting, to know that you might have that large an impact on the lives of every American or person in the world, regardless of whether they have kidney disease or not. It's just really exciting.
Oh, I hear you. And I'll tell you, so to reference one of my board members, Martin McGann, who's really big in the healthcare space. Martin has always said we should be doing much more in prevention rather than being a reactive medical community here in the United States. And if we could at Nephrodite, we could not only do what we're doing, but then focus our attention from what we're doing to also really help on the prevention side for kidney health, cardiovascular health, partnering with our friends in the cardiology and cardiac services space. I think that sort of builds the future, right? It makes us healthier and it reduces the overall burden over time. And we need to be doing that 100%.
And must, as you alluded to, improve mental health as well, which has become
absolutely
such a big problem. One of the things I'm always interested in when I discover an exciting life sciences company here in Atlanta is how you got here and what attracted you. And maybe you can share with us a little bit about your relationship with Georgia Tech as well.
Absolutely. Full disclosure, my parents came over on the first sort of immigration wave in the 60s from a small continent, India, and they came over, we really in the heart of Detroit, as healthcare providers, as physicians. To Detroit, at the time was really thriving with the big three automakers, and they needed someone to take care of all those engineers, right, and all those workers at the auto plants. And I grew up there, and I suspect a lot of people have a lot of things to say about Detroit, and we got used to it over time. But when you're from Detroit, you love Detroit. As I continued my training, I really wanted to find a place that, because of my expertise in cancer and to some degree transplantation, but also in robotics, I wanted to find a place that I could really flourish with that expertise. And the Southeast at the time had been relatively under penetrated. And as I did my research, and I had some family members here that were living in the Stone Mountain area, and so Atlanta was always this just amazing place because it was always a heck of a lot warmer and sunnier than we ever had up in Detroit. And so when the opportunity came to come to Atlanta, it just really made sense for so many different reasons. And I have to tell you, we never really looked back. It's just an amazing city, and that kept us here. I always had an academic bend to me. I spent some time as an NIH fellow and did a fair amount of research. And so when I took the position here in Atlanta, it was not an academic position. And so the first thing that I did was I wondered how could I get some of that academic back into the fold. And so I happened to meet a wonderful human being named Professor Henrik Christensen, who was the new head of robotics at Georgia Tech. And we were just talking. I think we met at a tag event where I was asked to speak at a tag event. And we said hi to each other, and we were talking about it. And I asked him, have you ever been to the operating room to see a robotic surgery? And he said, no, he hadn't. So I invited him to the operating room, and we started collaborating. And that's when I became an adjunct professor, and I loved every minute of it.
Okay. Finally, I think that you've been on this journey with Nephrodite since 2014. Is that the right?
That's correct.
Right.
That's
there?
right.
Okay. What have you learned about yourself in the last 8 years?
Wow, you're digging deep here. So I've learned a ton of humility. I'll tell you that much. And to be fair, surgeons might not have a lot of that. We have a ton of ego. But
I want that in my surgeon.
That's right. I always knew that communication was king. It was really important. I have learned to really hone my communication skills, but I would say two things would define it. Number one, What have I learned? I knew grit going through surgical training, and in the day that I went through it, if you didn't have grit, you didn't make it through. But this was grit at a different level, and I can't emphasize grit more. It was everything, and I will tell you that the other thing maybe that I've learned a heck of a lot with on the communication side was becoming a better listener. I now tend to be the one that listens more in the room. I'll speak when I have something that's very, very useful, but I tend not to talk unless I'm unless I'm on a podcast with you being asked questions. But I have become a much better, not great, but a much better listener, and that's really served me well. I wish I could become an even better one, and I'm working on that.
Well, I think that we all appreciate not only your ability to listen, but also to some degree that the decision-making ability for a surgeon grows out of some arrogance. You want to be able to make a decision, and then in the case where you've made the wrong one, to make another one really fast, right?
That's right.
So I guess that's something that we can all look to and try and model for ourselves. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us today, Nikhil, and we really appreciate all that time and wish you well, and we wish Nephrodite and Holly well, because I think it'll do the world an awful lot of good. Thanks very much.
Well, I appreciate it, and this was great and very enjoyable, and I plan on I plan on keeping in communication with you and the general community here because really excited about being here in Atlanta, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Good. Thanks for tuning in to the Life Sciences and Biotech podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. The information contained in this website and podcast are purely informational and not considered investment recommendations. Tim Doherty's participation in Biotech Insights is separate and apart from his role as an investment advisor representative. Nothing contained herein can be construed as a recommendation or endorsement of any of the companies discussed. Tim Doherty also has no financial affiliation with any of the companies mentioned in this communication. Tim Doherty makes no representation that the information contained in this material is accurate and is under no obligation to update this information as changes occur.